Across the ruins of Hamburg, the hollow clatter of freight cars echoed through empty streets, marking the end of the Reich's desperate gamble in the West. For millions, it was liberation from terror. But for a certain group of young women in faded Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms, this day meant something very different. Their faces were gaunt, shadowed by sleepless nights, their hands trembling from weeks of rationed bread mixed with sawdust. They were Wehrmacht's Helferinnen, radio operators, telephonists, and signal corps workers, cogs in a military machine that had promised them glory and delivered only ash. The Reich had trained them, fed them propaganda thicker than the black bread they choked down, and sent them to communication posts across collapsing fronts. Now, in May 1945, they stood in a rail yard under the watch of American soldiers whose faces held no cruelty, only weariness. The women had been told stories, whispered in barracks and shouted from podiums. Americans were brutes, they were told, who would humiliate captured enemies, especially women. Starvation, degradation, perhaps worse awaited them, but as the soldiers gestured them toward the trains with neither violence nor contempt, the first crack appeared in the fortress of their expectations. One woman whispered to another, "Where are the chains?" There were none. Only clipboards, manifests, and the grinding wheels of transport toward an unknown fate across an ocean they had been taught to fear. The trains rolled north through landscapes that bore the scars of total war. Through smudged windows, the women watched their homeland pass in fragments, rubble where Dresden had stood, skeletal factories along the Ruhr, fields pocked with craters. They spoke little, each locked in private terror about what awaited them in America. The propaganda had been clear. The enemy showed no mercy. At Bremerhaven, they boarded a converted troop transport. The ship was utilitarian, cold steel and narrow corridors, but it was organized. Guards directed them to berths below deck, 6 women to a cabin meant for 4. But the bunks had mattresses, thin but real. That first night at sea, as the vessel cut through black Atlantic waters, something happened that shattered their first assumption. Mess call came at 1800 hours. The women filed into the galley expecting gruel, perhaps stale bread, the kind of rations reserved for the defeated. Instead, the smell hit them first. Real meat, boiled potatoes, the yeasty warmth of fresh bread. The line moved in stunned silence. Each woman received a metal tray laden with beef stew carrots, glistening with butter, 2 thick rolls that yielded under the touch, and a tin cup of coffee that smelled like something remembered from childhood before the war devoured everything. One woman, her hands shaking, brought a piece of bread to her lips. The texture was soft, impossible, nothing like the sawdust loaves that had sustained them for years. She bit down, and tears came unbidden. Around her, others wept silently into their trays, overwhelmed not by cruelty, but by this incomprehensible kindness. They had been enemies of these people, had served the regime that bombed their cities, and yet here was real food, served without ceremony, without humiliation. 10 days later, the skyline of New York emerged through morning mist. The women crowded the deck, and what they saw struck them mute. Towers of steel and glass rose untouched by war, gleaming in early sunlight. No ruins, no craters, no skeletal buildings clawing at the sky. The Statue of Liberty stood serene in the harbor, an irony none of them could process. Enemies arriving at the symbol of freedom, not as conquerors but as captives. The contrast with Hamburg, with Berlin, with every German city they had known, was a physical blow. America had not been touched. America was whole. Buses carried them inland through landscapes that seemed conjured from dreams. Farms with painted barns, towns with intact storefronts, children playing in streets that bore no memory of bombs. The women pressed their faces to windows, unable to reconcile this abundance with the moonscapes they had left behind. At the processing center, they were counted, catalogued, issued clean uniforms. Guards spoke in clipped English, efficient but not harsh. There were no beatings, no degradation. Then came the moment that would define everything that followed. The line moved slowly through a building that smelled of soap and fresh paint. As each woman entered the commissary, their expectations collided with a reality so far removed from their fears that some simply stopped, frozen. A soldier behind a counter gestured to a row of pitchers. The liquid inside was the color of Florida sunlight, vibrant gold, almost luminous. He poured a glass and handed it to the first woman. She stared at it, confused. The glass was cold in her hands, beaded with condensation. The aroma hit her next, sharp and sweet and impossibly fresh, a citrus explosion that transported her instantly to a time before the war, when oranges were not legends, but things you could hold. She lifted the glass to her lips and drank. The taste was a revelation. Fresh orange juice, pulp and acid and sweetness combined, cold and alive in her mouth. She had not tasted fresh fruit juice in 4 years. The war had taken oranges from Germany by 1941, replaced them with chicory coffee and turnip soup. And here, in the land of the enemy, on her first day as a prisoner, she was given this. Some of the women cried openly, unable to contain the shock. Others laughed nervously, as if the juice might vanish if they acknowledged it. A few refused to drink, suspicious of poisoning, until they watched guards pour from the same pitcher and drink themselves. For the first time in years, they felt something crack inside, a wall built by propaganda and maintained by fear. It was not humiliation they had been given. It was abundance, and it shook them to the core. Among them stood a young woman with dark blonde hair tied back under a Wehrmacht auxiliary cap. Her name was Lisa Hartmann, 23 years old, from Stuttgart, where she had worked as a radio operator for the Luftwaffe Signal Corps until the collapse. She had lost 2 brothers to the Eastern Front and her father to Allied bombing. The Reich had promised her that service meant honor. America had promised her nothing, yet handed her this glass of golden liquid that tasted like a childhood she barely remembered. That night, in a barracks bed that sagged but held her weight, Lisa opened a small notebook she had hidden in her coat lining. She wrote by dim light, "We were told we would be starved, beaten, treated as less than animals. Instead, we were given orange juice. Fresh, cold, more precious than anything I have tasted in years. How can this be?" The camp settled into rhythm, marked by bells and routines. Reveille at 0600, roll call, assignments to work details. Some women worked in kitchens, others in laundries or gardens. Light labor that felt surreal after years of wartime desperation. They were paid in camp script, an internal currency they could spend at the canteen. It felt absurd, earning money as prisoners, yet there it was, proof of labor, proof of value. The refectorio was where the true shock deepened daily. When Lisa entered for the first lunch, the smell wrapped around her like a memory she thought lost forever. Roasted chicken, boiled potatoes glazed with real butter, carrots still firm and bright, soft rolls that steamed when broken open. There was milk, white and cold, served in actual glasses. There was coffee, bitter and rich, nothing like the acorn substitute they had endured in Germany. She ate slowly, each bite a small betrayal. Behind her, another woman whispered, "My brothers starved in the snow at Stalingrad, and here they feed us like this." It was not kindness they had been promised, but humiliation. And yet the humiliation never came. Only food, more food than they could finish, and the sickening realization that their captors had more abundance to waste than the Reich had ever provided to feed them. At night, unable to eat all their portions, some women burned leftover bread in secret, fearing their rations would be reduced if the Americans saw waste. But the rations never changed. Every meal arrived with the same impossible abundance. The canteen became a symbol of everything wrong with the world they had been taught to believe. Inside, shelves held Hershey bars, cigarettes, pencils, notebooks, lipstick, in a prison camp. Lisa bought a chocolate bar with her first week's script. It cost less than cigarettes cost outside the fence for American civilians. She bit into it slowly, the sweetness almost painful, and wrote in her diary that night, "I feel human again. But feeling human here, while my mother writes that they boil weeds for soup in Stuttgart, is a sin I cannot reconcile." The letters from home were the cruelest contrast. They arrived irregularly, censored and delayed, but their message was consistent: hunger, cold, rubble, desperation. Lisa's mother wrote in shaking script, "We have no coal for winter. Ilse's baby cries constantly from hunger. If you have anything at all, send it." But what could Lisa send? Orange juice? The absurdity of it crushed her. Around her, other women received similar letters, and a collective guilt settled over the barracks like fog. They ate in silence, food untouched on their plates, each woman confronting the same impossible equation. They were prisoners living better than their families who were free. The enemy fed them, their own nation had let them starve. Some began to feel shame heavier than chains. They were enemies, yet here they were fed, clothed, sheltered with a dignity that mocked every promise the Reich had made. Germany had demanded their loyalty, sent them to radio stations and signal posts and communication hubs, but gave them hunger and ruins in return. America, the sworn enemy, gave them orange juice. This inversion gnawed at their souls, unspoken but ever present. Lisa wrote, "To accept this kindness feels like treason. To reject it feels like madness. We are caught between what we were told and what we see with our own eyes, and the space between is agony." Before we continue with Lisa's journey, if you're finding this story as powerful as I am telling it, please take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps this channel grow and brings these forgotten stories to more people who need to hear them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click that subscribe button now. By subscribing, you'll be notified every time we publish a new video, ensuring you never miss another incredible chapter of history that deserves to be remembered. The guards themselves seemed surprised by what they found. Lieutenant Patricia Morgan, a young officer from Pennsylvania, wrote to her sister, "They are not what we were told. They are girls, most barely out of their teens, and they look at us as if waiting for a blow that never comes. Some flinch when we speak. It breaks your heart to see what that regime did to them, physically and mentally." The women in turn struggled to reconcile the propaganda with the reality. They had been shown films of American brutality, told stories of camps where prisoners were worked to death. Instead, they found routine, fairness, food. The battle between memory and reality, propaganda and truth, was harder than any physical labor. Lisa captured it in her diary with painful clarity. To be treated with dignity by those we were told were beasts. It is harder than hatred. Hatred is easy. Dignity is unbearable. Some guards tried to maintain professional distance, but humanity seeped through. One afternoon, a sergeant named Collins dropped his clipboard near where Lisa was working in the garden. She picked it up instinctively, handed it back. He nodded, said, "Thanks," and for a brief second, two enemies shared a moment of ordinary courtesy across a gulf the war had declared unbridgeable. As weeks became months, the rhythm of camp life became almost normal. Lise worked in the administrative office, translating documents, her fluency in English making her useful. She found herself thinking less about the war and more about small things, the quality of the coffee, the books in the camp library, the way American guards laughed at jokes she didn't understand. Small interactions began to humanize both sides. A guard named Sullivan started teaching the women American slang during breaks. Another, Private Kowalski, whose grandparents had emigrated from Poland, shared stories of his family's journey to America, a narrative of escape and hope that felt cruelly distant from the women's own histories. But the true transformation came when they were taken outside the wire. Work details often required transport to nearby farms for harvests or to factories that needed labor. Lisa's group was assigned to a citrus processing plant in central Florida. The first time the trucks rolled through an American town, the women fell silent. Main streets lined with shops whose windows displayed goods in abundance. Cars gleaming in sunlight, not rusted hulks, but functioning machines. Bakeries with signs advertising fresh bread, children on bicycles, cinemas with colorful posters. America was not only intact, it was flourishing. At the processing plant, the women were put to work, sorting fruit. The air was thick with citrus, a smell so intense it made Lisa dizzy. Oranges tumbled down conveyor belts in endless golden rivers, more oranges than she had seen in her entire life. Workers chatted casually, radios played swing music, and at midday, volunteers from a local church brought lunch. The meal was served in a community hall. The volunteers, mostly older women, smiled and spoke in gentle voices as they handed out sandwiches, fresh apple slices, and more orange juice. Lisa ate a slice of apple and was transported instantly to her grandmother's kitchen in Stuttgart before the war, when apples were not symbols, but simple food. The memory of her grandmother's hands, gnarled and kind, slicing apples for strudel, hit her with such force that she had to excuse herself and cry in a restroom where no one could see. That night in the barracks, the women talked quietly. One admitted, "Perhaps our nation lied to us." Another asked the question none had dared voice, "Who are the beasts now?" The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Their bodies, too, told stories of transformation. Faces that had been gaunt now filled out. Hair regained luster, skin took on color. One woman, looking in a mirror, gasped at her own reflection. She looked younger, healthier, as if captivity had reversed years of war's ravages. The recognition was unbearable. The enemy had made them healthy. Their own nation had made them starve. Each bar of chocolate chipped away at the fortress of propaganda. Each glass of orange juice slipped past the walls. It was not a clash of armies, but a slow erosion of belief. Hatred is a fortress. Orange juice, fresh and cold and impossibly abundant, found the cracks. Lisa worked in the gardens now, planting vegetables under a Florida sun that felt nothing like the grey skies of Stuttgart. She learned the names of American vegetables, laughed at her own mispronunciations, and sometimes forgot, for whole minutes at a time, that she was supposed to be suffering. But then, letters would come, and the guilt would return, with crushing force. Her mother's handwriting grew shakier each time. "Your sister's children have coughs that will not stop. We have no medicine. Frau Schultz's son died last week from hunger. We are told things will improve, but they only worsen. Save the orange peels if they give you oranges. Send them, we will boil them for soup. Orange peels for soup." Lisa stared at the letter, then at the breakfast tray in front of her. Scrambled eggs, toast with jam, a full glass of orange juice. The absurdity was suffocating. Autumn had turned, though time inside the wire felt strangely fluid. Its passage marked less by calendars than by the rhythm of meals, work, and letters from home. Yet, beneath the routine, something profound had taken root. For months the women had lived with the shock of survival in America, their days filled with orange juice and abundance, and ordinary kindness. But now came the harder reckoning, what all of this meant for who they had been and who they might become. As we've seen, these women faced an impossible choice between the propaganda they'd been taught and the reality they experienced. What strikes me most is how something as simple as orange juice could shatter years of indoctrination. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think was the most powerful moment in this story? Was it the first taste of orange juice, the letters from home, or perhaps the moment they feared returning to Germany more than staying in captivity? Share your perspective in the comments. I read every single one. Lisa sat on her bunk one cold evening, diary balanced on her knees. She wrote, "I have eaten more in captivity than in all the final years of the Reich. I have slept without fear of bombs, and yet my heart is not at peace. What kind of world is it where the enemy shows more dignity than our own?" Around her, some women had adapted so completely they laughed as if the war had never happened. They played cards, sang songs, made plans for after the war as if such a thing were possible. Lisa could not join them. Her loyalty to Germany, to the ruins and the suffering, still weighed like iron. The guards, too, had changed. They no longer saw enemies but individuals. Sergeant Collins shared cigarettes through the fence, asked about families, showed photographs of his own children back in Ohio. One evening, he said to another guard within Lisa's hearing, "You'd forget for a minute they were the enemy if you didn't look at the uniforms." More work details took them into towns. Exposure to American life continued, relentless in its normalcy. Jazz on the radio. Baseball scores announced with enthusiasm. People arguing about trivial things because they had the luxury to care about the trivial. The contrast with Europe's devastation was insupportable. Then came the rumor that shattered the fragile equilibrium: repatriation. Whispers spread through the barracks. Transports were being organized. Soon they would be sent home. The fear was immediate and collective. One woman admitted in a shaking voice what they all felt: "I am afraid to go back." The confession hung in the air, taboo and true. To return meant hunger, ruins, winter without coal, children crying from empty bellies. To stay meant captivity, but captivity with food, warmth, life. The transformation in the mirror was the cruelest revelation. The women's bodies had changed. Faces filled out, hair regained its luster, color returned to cheeks. Some even looked younger, as though captivity had peeled away years of war. To see themselves restored in this way was almost unbearable. It forced them to recognize how deeply the Reich had failed them. Lisa stood before a small mirror in the washroom one morning and barely recognized herself. Her cheeks had color. Her eyes were clear. She looked like the girl she had been before the war devoured everything. And she thought of her mother, skeletal and cold in Stuttgart, who would see this healthy, well-fed daughter and know that while the family starved, Lisa had lived well. The guilt was acid. Would their families even recognize them? Well-fed, clean, cheeks glowing. Would there be accusation in their mother's eyes? A silent indictment. You lived well while we starved. Lisa stared at her diary that night, the pages filled with months of impossible contradictions. She wrote the words she had never dared before. I fear leaving more than I feared arriving. The confession chilled her, but it was honest. For the enemy's greatest weapon had not been guns or bombs. It had been orange juice, fresh and cold and abundant. And those things had done what hatred could not. They had changed her. The work continued, the meals continued, the routines continued. But beneath it all, every woman felt the same truth growing like a shadow. America had not defeated them with cruelty. It had defeated them with kindness, and there was no preparing for that. The morning came cold, frost on the windows, winter asserting itself even in Florida. The women gathered in the yard, breath visible in the air. An officer stood with a clipboard flanked by guards whose faces were unreadable. The following names, he began, voice carrying across the silent assembly. You will be transported for repatriation proceedings. Hearts hammered. Some women gripped each other's hands. The names were read slowly, each syllable landing like a thunderclap. Lisa Hartmann. Her name. Her turn. She stepped forward, legs unsteady, into the cold morning light. Around her, other names were called. Other women stepped forward, all of them caught in the same impossible moment. And as Lisa heard her name called, as she stepped forward into the cold morning light, she realized the true conflict was no longer between nations. It was inside her, in the space where hatred had once lived, and where something new, fragile, dangerous, undeniable had begun to grow. She would return to the ruins. She would face her mother's hollow eyes and her sister's starving children. She would eat boiled weeds and understand, finally, what her family had endured while she lived in abundance. But she would carry something back with her that no propaganda could erase. The memory of orange juice, the taste of dignity, the knowledge that the enemy had shown her more humanity than her own nation ever had. And in that knowledge, fragile and dangerous as it was, lay the seed of something the war could not destroy. Not forgiveness, perhaps. Not absolution, but understanding. The recognition that on both sides of the wire, behind every uniform, stood human beings capable of cruelty and kindness in equal measure. The bus engines roared to life. Guards gestured them forward. Lise climbed aboard, clutching her small bundle of possessions and the diary she had kept hidden all these months. Through the window she watched the camp recede, the fences and barracks and gardens where she had worked under a Florida sun. As the landscape rolled past, she understood that this had been the real battlefield, not the one fought with bullets and bombs, but the one fought with orange juice and kindness, with full plates and ordinary decency. And in that battle, her certainties had been casualties. She opened her diary one last time as the bus carried them toward the port. In careful script she wrote, "They defeated us not with hatred, but with abundance. They gave us orange juice when we expected cruelty, and in doing so they forced us to see that we had been lied to see that the enemy was human, to see that our own nation had starved us while calling it sacrifice. This is the hardest truth, that the greatest damage was done not by bombs but by the lies we believed, and the greatest weapon was not violence, but a glass of cold orange juice on a hot Florida morning." She closed the diary and looked out at America passing by, whole and untouched and impossibly abundant, and she knew that no matter what awaited her in the ruins of Germany, she would never again believe so easily, never again accept so blindly. The taste of fresh orange juice had taught her that. The war had taken everything from her, but captivity had given her something unexpected, the ability to question. And in a world built on propaganda and lies, the ability to question was the most dangerous freedom of all. The ships that carried them back across the Atlantic were crowded, cold, nothing like the vessels that had brought them to America. The women huddled together in the holds, sharing thin blankets, trading whispered fears about what awaited them. When they docked at Bremerhaven, the ruins greeted them like a physical blow. What had been a port city was now a skeleton, buildings gutted, streets choked with rubble. The women disembarked into a Germany that barely resembled the nation they had left. Lise made her way south through destroyed landscapes. She traveled by foot, by hitched rides on military trucks, through towns that were graveyards of brick and ash. When she finally reached Stuttgart, she almost didn't recognize it. The street where she had grown up was gone, replaced by rubble and makeshift shelters. Her mother's face, when Lise found her in a basement shelter, was that of a stranger, gaunt, aged 20 years in two, eyes hollow with hunger and loss. But when she saw Lise, those eyes filled with tears. "You're alive," her mother whispered, embracing her with arms that felt like twigs. "You're alive and you're healthy." There was no accusation in her voice, only wonder and grief. Lise held her mother and wept, the guilt crushing her chest. She had eaten while her mother starved. She had slept in safety while her family cowered in basements. She had tasted orange juice while they boiled weeds. But in the weeks that followed, as she helped her family survive in the ruins, Lise shared her story. At first they didn't believe her. Orange juice, fresh bread, real meat. It sounded like propaganda, a different kind, designed to humiliate. But Lise's diary, hidden carefully and brought home, told the truth in her own handwriting. And slowly, painfully, her family began to understand. They had been lied to about everything. About the war, about the enemy, about what awaited those who fell into American hands. "They treated you better than our own government ever did," her mother said one night, voice breaking. It was not a question. It was the most damning indictment imaginable. In the years that followed, as Germany rebuilt from the ashes, Lise carried the memory of Florida with her, the smell of citrus, the taste of cold orange juice, the sound of guards laughing without cruelty. She told the story to anyone who would listen, and many did, because in the ruins of the Reich, where every certainty had been shattered, people needed to understand how thoroughly they had been deceived. The orange juice became a symbol, not of American superiority, but of the power of simple humanity to undo years of propaganda, of how kindness could defeat hatred more thoroughly than any weapon, of how the smallest gesture, a glass of fresh juice, could change a life forever. I'm curious about something. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your location in the comments below, and while you're at it, tell me what aspect of World War II history fascinates you most. Is it the human stories like Lise's, the strategic battles, the home front experiences, or perhaps the lesser-known perspectives we rarely hear about? Your answers help me understand what stories to bring you next, so please take a moment to share. I love connecting with viewers from all corners of the globe who share this passion for preserving history. Lise lived to see Germany rise from the rubble, saw her nation transform from enemy to ally, saw the world change in ways she never could have imagined standing in that Hamburg rail yard in May 1945, but she never forgot the taste of that first glass of orange juice, cold and sweet and impossibly fresh. Never forgot the lesson it taught her, that the greatest victories are not won with bullets, but with the courage to see humanity in the enemy. And in her final years, when grandchildren asked her about the war, she would smile sadly and say, "I learned more from a glass of orange juice than from all the speeches and propaganda combined. I learned that when you strip away the uniforms and the flags and the hatred, what remains is simply people. And people, given the choice, would rather share their abundance than inflict cruelty. That is the lesson I carried home from captivity. That is the truth that survived the ruins." If this story moved you, there's another incredible chapter of forgotten history waiting for you. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to discover more untold stories from World War II that challenge everything we thought we knew about the war. Don't let these voices fade into silence. Watch it now and remember to subscribe so you never miss another story that deserves to be remembered.